broadcasting live from KPMG's headquarters in Johannesburg this morning, where Lullu Krugel, Senior Economist at KPMG, Oti Ikomi, Senior Vice President of Ecobank Transnational, and Nicolas Maweni, Marketing and Communications Specialist, are still with me, and we're talking about investment in Africa. Lulu, we've looked at the opportunity, the potential, and some of the challenges to actually exploiting it all. If we explore possible models that could be leveraged off here, let's take a look for a moment at PPPs. How do we make both public and the private sectors work for the common good?
Well, up to now, we've seen that in certain sectors it has been very successful. If we look at the telecoms industry, for example, that seemed to have worked very well for Africa. Investment in the telecoms industry, if you look at infrastructure investment, is probably one of the most well-funded areas in Africa. But there are certain other areas where we still need private investors to get involved, where we're lagging behind. And these areas are less attractive for private investors. Some of those areas, for example, is water, sanitation and sewage, and irrigation, things that are really, really necessary, and probably areas where Africa is lagging behind in terms of investment the most. The same goes for energy. There we also had some mixed reaction. But yeah, in certain sectors there has been success, and it seemed to have been mainly because there was a lot of conversation taking place between private sector and government. They were very open. It seems business as well was open, and they understood what they got themselves into. They didn't necessarily impose the business models that they had in certain other areas of the world in those industries. If you look at the telecoms industry, a lot of the companies that were successful in Africa were companies that actually started in Africa and that have a real sense of how to do business in Africa.
Nicolas, conversation is key here, and this could perhaps be a function of colonialism, but trust seems to be a key ingredient that's missing in that relationship between African governments and the private sector. How do we bridge that gap?
Well, it's a very sad one, because if you don't trust each other, it's very difficult to really proceed with anything else. I find one of the best ways that most sort of the business as well as the government tries to build that is through relationship building. So that's the most important part, where in fact we advise most of the private sector to sort of focus on, build relationships with the relevant government. There's one thing that's very consistent when it comes to the rest of the African continent, and that is government stays longer. Whether for the good reason or the bad ones. So at least you can always wake up, the president of whatever particular country is going to be there for the next 10 years. So you can invest in that relationship. And then once you've done that, and trust will certainly be earned.
Just taking a look at it from a business perspective, Oti, I mean, do you see it? Do you wake up with that calm and reassurance that government is going to be there the next day? What's your relationship with government across a spectrum of countries that you're operating in?
I think as an organization, we've had, and been a leading Pan-African organization, we've had a very good experience with governments, but I will not be quite as optimistic and bullish as Nicolas, but because really it's a mix between continuity and efficiency and productivity and democratization. So these all variables have to kind of work together. But at a very broad level, there are opportunities in the African environment. Governments are seeing and listening more to the demands of people, as I said earlier. And one other aspect that is also very important is that, which I think Josphat was talking about, there's increased inter-regional opportunities. You have a situation where you have over 15 or 16 landlocked countries in Africa. So, and they have various economic forums. So either as single governments or as regional blocks, there are really opportunities to work together, be it for the PPP discussion earlier, be it for systems enhancement, be it for telecoms. So these are a number of other areas to look at on that subject.
Lulu, because this is all happening in a context where we've got state-owned enterprises to a large extent battling to demonstrate long-term ability and effective utilization of resources. We had Josphat also, before we let him go, touch on the issue of privatization. Is that the answer?
Well, There's always, that's just an emotive issue always, and it's always, it's something that one should consider on a case-by-case basis. I don't think it is the be-all and end-all answer for everything. Sometimes markets don't provide the answer. Markets are not efficient to provide the services that needs to be provided. It's simply not affordable for private sector to get involved in certain of those areas. So in certain instances, there's definitely a need for state-owned enterprises.
Well, we can use Nigeria as a case in point. I mean, they've come really full circle on that PPP story, where we've had problems in the financial sector and government needing to step in, actually bailing them out. So it seems that you can't completely kick government out, can you?
Yes, I mean, you can't completely kick government out. Obviously, the specific instance of the financial sector reforms in Nigeria were required at that time. But if you also focus on Nigeria, looking again at the infrastructure space, a major challenge in Nigeria has been power generation and the supply of electricity. So as we speak, there's a whole major effort in Nigeria. There's a whole range of power reforms led by the president, but they are recognizing that they need to bring in private sector. So there's actually a commercialization and privatization process going on right now of all of the power plants and the power distribution companies in Nigeria. So expectedly, this will bring in additional foreign investment, international best practice operators, because when you get the infrastructure and the power requirement right, it has a multiplier effect on the rest of the nation. And I suspect this also will apply to many other countries in the continent.
In fact, Nicolas, I mean, when it comes to government and the supportive role that it could play for business operating on the continent, tax benefits aside, you know, we're looking at quite a bit of focus on infrastructure, where we've got business at this stage incurring huge costs because of the lack of infrastructure that supports business at this stage. How much of a hindrance do you see this for business?
It's a huge hindrance. Remember, government is there as an enabler. And if the environment is not very conducive, I mean, you know, government will not be able to attract the relevant direct investment, nor will they be able to have enough money for tax. There's a couple of things that were sort of mentioned by my colleagues here when it comes to the privatization and the triple P. You know, most of the governments in Africa, they're sitting with a similar problem, that of skills. Remember that for as long as the private sector continues to poach, you know, those with the right skills from government, you know, will always have these challenges. And unfortunately, government can come up with the greatest policies to make sure that they attract the relevant investments. But at the end, you know, we need those great CEOs, those soldiers on the ground to implement those policies. Africa has produced the best policies, but very few of them have actually had an opportunity of being implemented.
Yep. Well, it often comes from lessons learned as well, Oti. So, you know, if you're looking at countries in Africa that are showing leadership with regard to, you know, assessing political risk, improving infrastructure, education, developing a skills base as well, and elevating populations out of poverty, who, in your opinion, is leading the pack? Who can we be learning lessons from at this stage?
Obviously, being in 30 countries, I will not go and wear a corporate hat, but speaking more as an individual, I look at countries like Botswana. They've done quite well in really taking advantage of the economic resources and really growing productivity and wealth of the citizenry. On the West African side, there's been a lot of progress of late in Ghana. It's beginning to show the right fundamentals. There's political continuity. It is also attracting a lot of investments. When you look at the Chinese investments into Africa, apart from a couple of countries, Ghana stands out. So those are two very key countries that come to mind. One important aspect is that this year there's about 15 elections across Africa. So the political situation, the change process has to be well managed, and we hope that the current events in Côte d'Ivoire will pass on and not get transmuted into other environments.
In the meantime, in practical terms, what are some of the essential considerations when doing business in Africa from someone who's experienced it now in 30 countries?
A key requirement is it's your long-term view of that country and of that environment. So for us, we have a strategy that is Africa. So we have a more long-term view, and we are willing to stay the course. Then importantly, as mentioned, how do you deal with infrastructure? How do you deal with skill sets? How do you deal with things like telecoms? And then when you put all of that together, how do you then ensure that you get your right returns in a very quick period? We have a situation now where we have a lot of new branches and new countries, and we are making sure that they all turn into profitability very quickly to help the stakeholders. But these are very important, looking at infrastructure, looking at the availability of the right resources, and then working on things like power and other connectivity areas. Yeah.
Well, at this stage, we'd like to open up the conversation to members of the audience that are present with us today. So if you've got any questions for our esteemed panel of guests, please free to ask them. They're ready to field them. And we've got a roving microphone that's doing the round. So please show by indication of raising your hand if you have a question, and it will find its way to you.
Hi, Alishia. I'm Dani van Heerden from KPMG. I'd just like to get a view from the panel. South Africa has now been allowed into the so-called BRIC countries. Is that a small S or is that a big S? Is this a non-event, or is there really significance to our membership, and what does that mean for Africa? Thank you.
Okay, Nicolas.
Should I agree? Thanks, Dani. It's, and I'm not being facetious about BRIC. It's such a wonderful concept. It's such a wonderful grouping of these companies who've got sort of countries who've got something in common. But really, what can they offer each other is my question. Other than they can merge and probably lobby and they have a common cause. But at the end of the day, there's very little that, in fact, BRIC can do. I think it's about time for us to really start waking up. We've seen a number of those. We've still got an agenda where we've started of thinking, are we ever going to have the United States of Africa, which, the likes of His Excellency Gaddafi wanted? I'm just thinking, let's really get our priorities right. So the S at this stage, I think, is very, very, very small.
Mm-hmm. Of course, we've got a contentious debate around this, Lulu. I mean, what's your view on this?
Well, I guess it all depends on how South Africa positions itself in that relationship. We need to make sure that when we do business, and this goes for South Africa and for the rest of Africa as well, how do we actually get the benefits from those opportunities from those countries, China, India, that is investing in Africa? I'm not sure that all the countries in Africa always have the capacity to be able to maximize the benefits that come into the country. We mentioned things like skills development and how important it is to actually develop the local community. But I also want to just state carefully that we should not be so outward focused and looking at the rest of the world that we forget about trade in Africa. We suddenly now become involved in the global arena and see ourselves, growing in stature there. But the importance of Africa trade is fundamental to growth in Africa, and we should never lose focus of that.
Okay, well, let's get another one from the audience.
Hi, Alishia. My name is Thierry. I'm the chairman of South African DRC Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to ask a question to the gentleman from Ecobank. We've seen from the couple of years a lot of banks from Europe come and buy stakes in banks in Africa. There's any plan or strategy from Ecobank to buy stakes in different banks in, for example, South Africa? Is any plan for that for Ecobank or in a part of the world, part of the Africa?
Thank you. Ecobank, as of today, we are in 30 countries in Africa. We're actually here in South Africa. I work in the South African office, but it's a representative office. We're not using our balance sheet or giving you loans at this point in South Africa. But we do manage the corporate bank, what we call a Pan-African corporate banking model from here in South Africa. We actually have a wholesale bank, Ecobank, in Paris, France. So we are one of the few African banks that actually have that kind of an organization. We also have a representative office in Dubai, and we are looking at an expansion for a rep office into China and possibly the UK. our strategy, various organizations have different strategies. We are not on a continuous geographical expansion. Actually, for Ecobank, our geographical expansion is coming fairly to a close because we focus on Middle Africa, which is our strength, and then we have the select international offices that we're going to work with. We're now taking it to other levels where we have alliances. For instance, we have an alliance with Netbank, okay, Ecobank Netbank Alliance. We have an alliance with Bank of China and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Another answer from the back.
Thank you. I'm Ahmed Juma, I'm an independent consultant. Given that there is an impediment flowing from a lack of skills available in Africa, do you know of any active steps being taken to reattract skilled Africans working in Europe and North America, diaspora Africans?
Yeah, should I try that? I've been involved with a company that's actually having a huge, one of the global companies, in fact. They're very much involved trying to do exactly that. There has been challenges on this. It's a great program, great initiative. However, you see, one has got to be careful because most of these individuals have been away from home far too long. Either for about 5 years or 10 years. They've been in the US and various parts of the world. And then when they do come back, it's quite difficult for them to readjust. Other than what's stated in their passport to confirm their citizenship. But remember, 5-10 years is enough to really change one's perceptions and all of that. So they're a little bit frustrated, most of them. So they don't stay. They go there and they stay for about a year or two. And then they probably want to disappear and go back to the country that was either gave them the greatest opportunities. So I think maybe what needs to happen is we need to get the likes of great consultants like yourself and really put these great initiatives together and see what can one do to retain the individuals into their respective countries. How do you restore that self-pride, from those citizens?
Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question? Let me get it right. We're getting answers from the front, question from the back.
Thank you. I'm Tanti from KPMG. My question is from what Josphat said, that we should not be hung up on local ownership and look at accelerated growth as Africans. But there's an argument that as Africans, we should guard our African jewels jealously. So I want to know, should the African governments be protective of the African jewels? And if yes, what does that do to foreign investment into Africa? Anyone can take it.
Lulu, I mean, that goes back to that whole nationalism around resources and protecting, what we've got for local economies.
Well, I suppose the entire argument around it is how do you manage it? It is very difficult, and I mean, in the rest of the world, if you look at countries that have developed, that have moved forward, it is countries that foreign investors have been enabled to come and do business. They know that it's open, they know that it's, I should not say necessarily easy, that's not maybe the right word, but that the environment is conducive for them to do business. And sometimes an agenda of nationalization can be seen as anti-investment and anti-foreign investment. So the question is, how do you manage that to make sure that you get the right mix of involvement of locals? We heard it earlier as well. How do you get people involved in the projects where skills can be developed? How can you make sure that the companies that do invest there actually have an interest in those countries in which they are investing? So my personal view is it is something that it's an emotive issue. It's something that lies close to the heart of people, and that's what makes it so difficult. But it really is important to also realize that if we want to attract foreign investment, we need to send the message to foreign investors that they can come and invest in a country.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for when it comes to questions from the floor. Just to wrap up with our panel, Lulu, let's start off with you. Sum up, in your view, the investment case for Africa. Is Africa entering a sweet spot despite some of the outflows we're seeing from emerging markets right now?
Well, there's a lot of different sectors that are punted at the moment. The retail sector, the energy sector. Africa is one of the very few regions in the world where energy consumption is expected to continue growing to 2050. So definitely the market is there. It will continue to grow. But the thing is, we need the right mixture of things. We really, at this point in time, here and there, I think, need a little bit of magic for things to go in the right direction. And once that cake is in the oven, so it can actually rise.
Well, Nicolas, you've sat on various companies' boards operating on the continent. I mean, have you seen a change in the kinds of questions you get asked about investing in Africa from your international peers, or a change in the way you're answering questions as well?
It's been a huge change, and I think, as we've mentioned, it's not corruption anymore. It's about risk management, and that becomes a big buzzword for most boards. And this is not just for managing risk as in a financial risk. There's a reputational risk that most companies are dealing with. Because remember, the people who are there, those companies who actually invested, they're probably an arm or representing a sort of a foreign multinational. So that's really the kind of issues that are being discussed at this stage. But lastly, Alishia, you know, the other thing about it is, I think as sooner we always make sure that we find a solution for Africa, which must be found by the Africans, it's only then that we'll get closer to these kind of initiatives.
Why has it proven to be so evasive and such a challenge thus far?
Well, I guess it's simply because, you know, we don't do this with wholeheartedly. And, you know, we do this, you know, in a most opportunistic way. And when we get involved, you know, we just don't really do this and just put all our eggs and invest in it with passion and all of that. So that's just, to me, one of the challenges that I'm finding on that one.
Well, Oti, all of that having been said, post-recession, where do you see Africa fitting in the global economy in what they're calling the new world order? I mean, we've alluded to being a partner or part of BRIC at this stage. What's your opinion on that?
If you quote Professor Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate who was in South Africa recently, and he said that deservedly, this is actually Africa's time for mention. You know, this is the time for Africa. We, as I mentioned earlier, and mentioned also by Lulu, the opportunities for interregional trade, the opportunities for efficiency enhancements, be it from payment systems, be it from telecoms, broadband, skill sets. This is really the moment for Africa. We just have to seize it. We have to take it fully, and between a combination of government and business, we take this forward. But these are really exciting moments, and we will continue to be very focused on Africa in our organization.